This is day 7 of the June 91 7-day retreat in Springwater. We will let our questions rest for today, the last talk, and read, as we've done for years, from selections by the writings and talks of Huang and Krishnamurti. These selections are not brought in on the last day to present authorities, but to listen to new words. Maybe they're old words for people, but they're only old when we listen with memory entirely. When the mind is fresh and open, even though one has heard these selections many times, they are also fresh and new. So, to beware not to just hum along with something one has heard, because that's not listening. To approach it as though one had never before heard it. And since there are many people here who are new, I need to say that Huang was a Zen teacher of the 9th and 10th century in China. The selections are not read to present Huang Po. If one wants to read Huang Po and to take the book oneself, they are highly abbreviated selections with words, sentences, and paragraphs, pages left out. Sometimes a Sanskrit word for better understanding is translated into English. The word Buddha as used, not just referring to the historical personage of Gautama Buddha, but to enlightened truth, or absolute truth, or a being who is understanding, who understands truth in its depth. Dharma, the word referring to either truth or a teaching, a true teaching or teaching about the truth. The selections were written down by a disciple of Huang Po, Pe Su, who was also a scholar of Buddhism, of Buddhist scriptures, and the governor of the province in which Huang Po taught. The book is called The Teaching of Huang Po and translated by John Blofeld. Since this is copyrighted material, this and the Krishnamurti readings, these cassettes will not be for sale, but the tapes can be listened to when one is here in this building. The Master said to me, all the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, here capitalized one and mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind, which is without beginning, is unborn and indestructible. It does not belong to the categories of things which exist or do not exist, nor can it be thought of in terms of young or old. It is neither long nor short, green nor yellow, big nor small, for it transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. It is like the boundless void which cannot be fathomed or measured. Here, as a commentary, void not meaning what we call a void in physics, a space without any kind of content, air, or just sucked dry. Void means that which is without name or reaction, without knowing, without measure, without limit. He says that what you see before you, unreacted to or unlabeled, unchosen. Begin to reason about it, he says, and you at once fall into error. It is like the boundless void which cannot be fathomed or measured. The one mind alone is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and seek externally for Buddhahood or for enlightenment, for liberation. By their very seeking, they lose it. For that is using mind to grasp mind. Even though they do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain to it. They do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, it will appear before them. For this mind is the Buddha, and Buddha is all living beings. It is not the less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifested in the Buddhas. Our original nature is in highest truth devoid of any atom of objectivity. It is void, omnipresent, silent, pure. It is glorious and mysterious, peaceful joy, and that is all. Enter deeply into it by awakening to it yourself. That which is before you is it, in all its fullness, utterly complete. There is naught beside it. What this before does not mean separate from the skin of this body. It is before you, within you, with no demarcation line. Even if you go through all the stages of progress, one by one, when at last, in a single flash, you attain full realization, you will only be realizing that which has been with you all the time, and by all the foregoing stages you will have added to it nothing at all. You will come to look upon those eons of work and achievement as no better than unreal actions performed in a dream. That is why the Buddha said, I truly attained nothing from complete, unexcelled enlightenment. It is only in contradistinction to greed, anger, and ignorance that abstinence, calm, and wisdom exist. Without illusion, how could there be enlightenment? If I refrained entirely from conceptual thought, what would be the use of all the teachings? Attach yourselves to nothing beyond the nature which is the original source of all things, the pure nature. Here's a dialogue between Pei Su and Huang more than 1,000 years ago, in a faraway country, in a faraway culture. What is the way, and how must it be followed? Huang Po, what sort of thing do you suppose the way to be that you should wish to follow it? Questioner. What instructions have the masters everywhere given for meditation practice and the study of the truth? Huang. Words used to attract the Tao of wit are not to be relied on. Questioner. If those teachings were meant for the dull-witted, I have yet to hear what truth has been taught to those of really high capacity. Huang. If there are really people of high capacity, where could they find people to follow? If they seek from within themselves, they will find nothing tangible. How much less can they find a teaching worthy of their attention elsewhere? Do not look to what is called the true teaching by preachers, for what sort of true teaching could that be? Questioner, if that is so, should we not seek for anything at all? Huang. By conceding this, you would save yourself a lot of mental effort. Questioner. But in this way, everything would be eliminated. There cannot just be nothing. Huang, who called it nothing? Who was this fellow? But you wanted to seek for something. Questioner. Since there is no need to seek, why do you also say that not everything is eliminated? This is mental logic at work. Someone says there's nothing to seek, and the brain says that means everything has to be eliminated, wiped out. I'll disappear. Huang, not to seek is to rest tranquil. One could say rest tranquil in the midst of turbulence. Not seeking the ending of that turbulence. To rest tranquil in the midst of it, in the presence of it. Not to seek is to rest tranquil. Who told you to eliminate anything? Look at the void in front of your eyes. How can you produce it or eliminate it? Or listen to the sounds all around you and within you. It has nothing to do with visual seeing. Look at the void or listen to the void around you. How can you produce it or eliminate it? Question, if I could reach this truth, would it be like the void? Huang, morning and night I have explained to you that the void is both one and manifold. I said this as a temporary expedient, but you are building concepts up from it. Questioner, do you mean that we should not form concepts as human beings normally do? Huang, I have not prevented you, but concepts are related to the senses, and when feeling takes place and concepts are formed, wisdom is shut out. Questioner, then should we avoid any feeling in relation to the true teaching or to the truth? Huang, when no feeling arises, who can say that you're right? Questioner, why do you speak as though I was mistaken in all the questions I've asked your reverence? Huang, you are a man who doesn't understand what is said to him. What is all this about being mistaken? Everything we hear, immediately we refer to ourselves, don't we? We can't just listen to something without self-reference. Just listen. Somebody's speaking. Question, up to now you have refuted everything which has been said. You have done nothing to point out the truth to us. Huang Po, in truth there is no confusion, but you produce confusion by such questions. What sort of truth can you go seeking for, or true teaching? Questioner, since the confusion arises from my questions, what will your reverence's answer be? Huang Po, observe things as they are and don't pay attention to other people. Or one can say, do pay attention to other people. But what may be meant here is to people who know they have the truth. There are some people just like mad dogs barking at everything that moves, even barking when the wind stirs among the grass and leaves. It has never been taught, Huang Po says later, that men should seek for learning or form concepts. Studying the way, in quotes, studying the way, is just a figure of speech. It is a method of arousing people's interest. In fact, the way is not something which can be studied. Study leads to the retention of concepts, and so the way is entirely misunderstood. Moreover, the way is not something especially existing. Truly, it is not located anywhere. The first step is to refrain from knowledge-based concepts. This implies that if you were to follow an empirical method to the utmost limit, on reaching that limit you would still be unable to locate mind, with a capital M here. The way is spiritual truth. The way is spiritual truth and was originally without name or title. It was only because people ignorantly sought for it empirically that Buddhas appeared and taught them to eradicate this method of approach. Fearing that nobody would understand, they selected the name way. Or Tao in Chinese, this is translated from this Chinese. You must not allow this name to lead you into forming a mental concept of a road. So it is said, when the fish is caught, we pay no more attention to the trap. When body and mind achieve spontaneity, the way is reached and mind is understood. Spontaneity meaning the freedom of compulsive, programmed reaction. Achieving, wanting to achieve being one of them. What is called supreme perfect wisdom implies that there is really nothing whatever to be attained. If you're able to understand this, you will realize that the way of the Buddhas and the way of the devils are equally wide of the mark. The original pure glistening universe is neither square nor round, big nor small. It is without any such distinctions as long or short. It is beyond attachment and activity, ignorance and enlightenment. You must see clearly that there is really nothing at all. The great chilocosms, numberless as grains of sand, are mere bubbles. All wisdom and all holiness are but streaks of lightning. None of them have the reality of mind. Mind is one. How can it lack a single hair of anything? Once I put this question to the Master: how many of the 400 or 500 persons gathered here on this mountain have fully understood your reverence's teaching?" The Master answered, "Their number cannot be known." Why? Because this way is through mind awakening. How can it be conveyed in words? Speech only produces some effect when it falls on the uninstructed ears of children. When we talk of the knowledge I may gain, the learning I may achieve, my intuitive understanding, my deliverance from rebirth, and my moral way of living, our successes make these concepts seem pleasant to us, but our failures make them appear deplorable. What is the use of all that? I advise you to remain uniformly quiescent and above all activity, by which I'm quite sure it doesn't mean never to get out of bed. Do not deceive yourselves with conceptual thinking, and do not look anywhere for the truth. For all that is needed is to refrain from allowing concepts to arise, and one can say take over the mind, whereby this refraining is a subtle matter, because immediately the mind looks for methods to prevent concepts from arising in the mind. Can there be seeing of concepts arising and taking over, or having taken over at the moment of seeing, of waking up? And see the box that these concepts create. Though others may talk of the way as something to be reached by various pious practices and scripture study, you must have nothing to do with such ideas. A perception, sudden as blinking, that subject and object are one, will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by this understanding you awake to the truth. When you happen upon someone who has no understanding, you must claim to know nothing. He may be delighted by his discovery of some way to enlightenment. Yet if you allow yourselves to be persuaded by him, you will experience no delight at all, but suffer both sorrow and disappointment. Even if you do obtain from him some trifling method, it will only be a thought-constructed thing, having nothing to do with Zen or with truth. Truth is something never lost, even in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. It is all-pervading, spotless beauty. It is the self-existent and uncreated absolute. Absolute meaning non-dependent on causes or conditions. He says, it is a jewel beyond all price. When a sudden flash of thought or image, when a sudden flash of thought or image occurs in your mind, and you see it for a dream or an illusion, then you can enter into the state reached by the Buddhas of the past. Not that the Buddhas of the past really exist, or that the Buddhas of the future have not yet come into existence. Above all, have no longing to become a future Buddha or enlightened being or liberated soul. Your sole concern should be as thought, and let me read that slowly. your sole concern should be, or can your sole concern be, as thought succeeds thought, to avoid clinging to any of them. Nor may you entertain at least the least ambition to be a Buddha or enlightened being here and now. Even if one arises, do not think of him as enlightened or deluded, good or evil. Hasten to rid yourself of any desire to cling to him. Cut him off in the twinkling of an eye. On no account seek to hold him fast, for 1,000 locks could not stay him, nor 100,000 feet of rope bind him. I will now make luminously clear how to set about being rid of that Buddha. Consider the sunlight. You may say it is near, yet if you follow it from world to world, you will never catch it in your hands. Then you may describe it as far away, and lo, you will see it just before your eyes. Follow it, and behold, it escapes you. Run from it, and it follows you close. You can neither possess it nor have done with it. From this example you can understand how it is with the true nature of all things, and henceforth there will be no need to grieve or worry about such things. The last question in this selection here is, but how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions or reactions to this and that? Huang, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips. And that a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. Also, by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but do not withdraw yourselves from them. Only by acting thus can you earn the title of a liberated one. Why does one need that title? Something to hang on to again. Drape around one's neck. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. Which means to understand what creates that. The past has gone, the present is a fleeting moment, the future has not yet come. When you practice meditation, sit in the proper position. Someone here suggested we get different chairs from those. Something could be better for the back, so we'll look into that. Sit in the proper position. Maybe lounging in a chair can be a proper position too. Lying flat on one's back. Some people say, the moment I lie on my back, the mind relaxes and there's some openness. Done with this idea of sitting up straight. I'm not saying one shouldn't sit straight. Or should. Stay perfectly tranquil, he says. I could say a lot about that too. How does it feel if somebody says to you, stay perfectly tranquil? do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. But what if they do disturb? Do not permit this, a dangerous talk, because there can be control again, shutting down, shutting off. So how does one look at or listen to disturbance? When it's there, and not to be in conflict with it. It shouldn't be there. I did something wrong. Huang Po said this, and I'm doing that. This alone is what is called liberation. Be diligent, be diligent. The next few selections are from Krishnamurti, who died 5 years ago, lived to the age of almost 91, talked for over 60 years, and all these many books are not all these books that he wrote. They are transcriptions, edited transcriptions of his talks and dialogues. These are questions and answers recorded and transcribed in India. It's called Question and Answers, Krishnamurti Foundation in India. The chapter is called Inattention. Question. One realizes deeply the importance of awareness in one's inner and outer actions. Yet one slips into inattention so easily. Must there be a Krishnamurti, the books, the cassettes to keep one alert? Why? Why this gap between understanding and immediate action? Krishnamurti. Why is inattention so easy, so common? It is taking place all the time. To be aware of what is happening inside the skin and what is happening outside the skin. Must there be somebody to remind you of it? Clothes do not make a man. By putting on robes, a monk does not become a saint. Either the clothes remind you that one must be constantly aware, and then you depend on the clothes. Or without these outward garments can you be aware and not slip into inattention. Is awareness, whatever it is, to be cultivated, developed through practice, through saying, I must be aware, and meditating on that awareness, or having some kind of thing to remind one of it constantly, whether a picture or a hair shirt, which is so uncomfortable that one is constantly reminded to be aware. Let us find out what it means to be aware. One cannot know everything that is happening in the world, what the politicians are doing, what the Secret Service is doing, what the army or the scientists are doing. One does not know what one's neighbor is doing, nor what one's wife or husband is doing inwardly. One cannot know everything. But one can know or become aware of one's own life inwardly. Now, is that inner movement different from the outer movement? Is that which is outside, the pollution, the corruption, the chicanery, the deception, the hypocrisy, the violence, is that very different from oneself inwardly? Or is it a constant movement like the tide going in and out? Can one be aware of this movement, see and observe it? Can one, in the process of observing this flow, this unitary movement, make any choice? In this movement, is awareness based on choice? Can one observe this movement, which is oneself and the world, for the world is oneself, without any choice? That observation is awareness, which one does not have to cultivate, about which one does not have to have somebody to remind one, neither books nor tapes. Once one sees for oneself the truth that this movement out there and the movement in here are essentially similar, one does not need any reminders. It is the same movement that has created the world, the society, the army, the navy, the scientist, the politician, and that movement is oneself. Can one seriously, not deceiving oneself, go very deeply into this awareness without choice, observing it without any direction? One has to be extremely watchful. Naturally, that awareness cannot be constant, but to be aware that it is not constant is to be aware of inattention. To be aware of inattention is attention. One cannot reasonably, sanely say, I'm going to be alert from the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep. One cannot, unless one is neurotic and practices saying, I'm going to be aware, I'm going to be aware. Then it becomes words and has no meaning. But if one sees that attention, awareness, cannot be maintained all the time, which is a fact, then inattention, not being attentive, has its value, has its meaning. Because in inattention you discover that you're not attentive. The questioner asks, why is there a gap between understanding and immediate action? What does one mean by understanding? Somebody explains the nature and the structure of the atom. One listens carefully and says, yes, I understand what you're saying. Or one listens to a philosopher and says, yes, I understand the basis of your theories. All that is intellectual discernment, understanding, intellectual understanding. That is the function of the intellect, to discern, to evaluate, to analyze. And at that level one says, I understand. The questioner asks, why is there a gap between understanding of that kind and immediate action? One has to deeply understand that the word never is the thing. The explanation never is the actuality. Now, understanding takes place when the mind is quiet, not merely at the intellectual level. You are telling me something serious, philosophic. If my mind is chattering, wandering away, I cannot fully comprehend what you are saying. So I must listen to you, not translate what you are saying or interpret what you are saying or listen partially because I'm frightened of what you might say, for then the mind is disturbed, moving, changing, volatile. Whereas, if I really want to listen to what you're saying, the mind must be quiet. Then there is a depth of understanding which is not merely intellectual or verbal. When there is profound perception of what is being said, false or true, and one can discover the truth in the false, then in that state of silent understanding, action is naturally immediate. There is no gap between the two. When one is standing on the edge of a precipice, one does not argue. The intellect does not say, let us discuss, think about it. One jumps away from the danger. There is immediate action of self-protection, which is healthy, natural, normal. One does not stand in front of a bus which is running one down, or stand looking at a dangerous snake or animal. It is a natural, instinctive response to save oneself. If perception is complete, which can only take place when the mind is quietly listening, not accepting, not denying, but listening, then that perception and action are the same. The next chapter is understanding. Question. I have understood the things we have talked over during these meetings, even if only intellectually. I feel they are true in a deep sense. Now when I go back to my country, shall I talk about your teachings with friends? Or, since I'm still a fragmented human being, will I only produce more confusion and mischief by talking about them? And Krishnamurti says, the questioner says, I have understood what you have said somewhat, partially, not completely. I'm not a transformed human being. I understand and I want to tell others what I have understood. I do not say I have understood the whole. I have understood a part. I know it is fragmented. I know it is not complete. I'm not interpreting the teachings. I am just informing you what I have understood. Well, what is wrong with that? But if you say, I have grasped the whole completely and I am telling you, then you become an authority, the interpreter. Such a person is a danger. He corrupts other people. But if I have seen something which is true, I'm not deceived by it. It is true. And in that there is a certain affection, love, compassion. I feel that very strongly. Then naturally I cannot help but go out to others. It would be silly to say I will not. But I warn my friends and I say, look, be careful, do not put me on a pedestal. The speaker is not on a pedestal. This pedestal, this platform is only for convenience. It does not give him any authority whatever. But as the world is, human beings are tied to something or other. To a belief, to a person, to an idea, to an illusion, to a dogma. So they are corrupt. And the corrupt speak, and we, being also somewhat corrupt, join the crowd. Seeing the beauty of these hills, the river, the extraordinary tranquility of a fresh morning, the shape of the mountains, the valleys, the shadows, how everything is in proportion, seeing all that, will you not write to your friend saying, come over here, look at this? You're not concerned about yourself, but only about the beauty of the mountain. These two selections are from a book called Krishnamurti's Notebook. The first selection was written down. This was a journal Krishnamurti kept for a part of a year in the 60s. This selection was written in Switzerland and the next one in India. It was a beautiful evening in the valley along the stream, the green meadows so rich in pasturage, the clean farmhouses, and the rapturous clouds so full of color and clarity. There was one that hung over the mountain with such vivid brilliancy that it seemed to be the favorite of the sun. The valley was cool, pleasant, and so intensely alive. There was a quietness about it and a peace. Modern farm machinery was there, but they still used the scythe, and the pressure and the brutality of civilization hadn't touched it. The heavy electric cables on pylons ran through the valley, and they too seemed a part of that unsophisticated world. As we walked along the narrow grassy path through fields, the mountains with their snow and color seemed so close and delicate, so utterly unreal. The goats were bleating to be milked. Quite unexpectedly, all this extravagant beauty, color, the hills, this rich earth, this intense valley, all this was within one. It wasn't within one. One's own heart and brain were so completely open, without the barrier of time and space, so empty of thought and feeling, that there was only this beauty without sound or form. It was there, and everything else ceased to be. The immensity of this love with beauty and death was there, filling the valley and one's whole being, which was that valley. It was an extraordinary evening. There is no renunciation. What is given up is ever there. And renunciation, giving up, sacrifice do not exist where there is understanding. Understanding is the very essence of non-conflict. Renunciation is conflict. To give up is the action of will, which is born of choice and conflict. To give up is to exchange, and in exchange there is no freedom, but only more confusion and misery. In the opening of masses of leaves was a pink flower of 3 petals. It was embedded in green, and it too must have been surprised by its own beauty. It grew on a tall bush, struggling to survive among all that greenery. There was a huge tree towering over it, and there were several other bushes, all fighting for life. There were many other flowers on this bush, but this one among the leaves had no companion. It was all by itself, and so more startling. There was a slight breeze among the leaves, but it never got to this flower. It was motionless and alone, and because it was alone, it had a strange beauty, like a single star when the sky is bare. And beyond the green leaves was a black trunk of the palm. It wasn't really black, but it looked like the trunk of an elephant. And as you watched it, the black turned to a flowering pink. The evening sun was upon it, and all the treetops were afire, motionless. The breeze had died down, and patches of the setting sun were upon the leaves. A small bird was sitting on a branch, preening itself. It stopped to look around and presently flew off into the sun. We were sitting facing the musicians, who were facing the setting sun. There were very few of us, and the little drum was being played with remarkable skill and pleasure. It was really quite extraordinary what those fingers did. The player never looked at his hands. They seemed to have a life of their own, moving with great rapidity and firmness, striking the taut skin with precision. There was never hesitation. What the right hand did, the left hand never knew, for it was beating out a different rhythm, but always in harmony. The player was quite young, grave, with sparkling eyes. He had talent and was delighted to be playing to that small, appreciative audience. Then a stringed instrument joined in, and the small drum followed. It was no longer alone. The sun had set, and the few wandering clouds were turning pale rose. At this latitude there is no twilight, and the moon, nearly full, was clear in a cloudless sky. Walking on that road with the moonlight on the water and the croaking of many frogs became a blessing. It is strange how far away the world is, and into what great depth one has traveled. The telegraph poles, the buses, the bullock carts, and the worn-out villages were there beside you, but you were far away, so deep that no thought could follow. Every feeling stayed far away. You were walking, aware of everything that was happening around you, the darkening of the moon by masses of clouds, the warning of the cycle bell, but you were far away, not you, but great vast depth. This depth went on more profoundly within itself, past time and the limits of space. Memory couldn't follow it. Memory is tethered, but this wasn't. It was total, complete freedom without root and direction. And deep, far from thought, there was bursting energy which was ecstasy, a word that has pleasurable, gratifying significance to thought, but thought could never capture it or travel the spaceless distance to pursue it. Thought is a barren thing and could never follow or communicate with that which is timeless. The thundering bus with its blinding lights nearly pushed one off the road into the dancing waters. The essence of control is suppression. Pure seeing puts an end to every form of suppression. Seeing is infinitely more subtle than mere control. Control is comparatively easy. It doesn't need much understanding. Conformity to a pattern, obedience to an established authority, fear of not doing the right thing, of tradition, the drive for success. These are the very things that bring about suppression of what is, or the sublimation of what is. The pure act of seeing the fact, whatever the fact may be, brings its own understanding, and from this, mutation takes place. we will end here for today.